Captain Laura stood on the bridge of the horizon, watching the stars drift past the large window in front of her. The ship moved quietly through the dark space of the Orion expanse, far beyond any known trade route or human colony. The horizon was alone out here, and every crew member knew it. Yet the ship did not feel empty. It felt alert, focused, ready for whatever waited ahead. Laura had always liked that feeling, even if it came with a little fear. She walked slowly toward the center console where Daniel Price was studying long-distance scans. He looked tired but calm. He had always been the kind of man who worked until he understood everything around him. His hands moved quickly across the controls, adjusting the scanners and checking new readings. Laura asked him what he had found, and Daniel answered that there was still nothing unusual. But then he paused, narrowed his eyes, and leaned closer to his screen. Something had changed. A faint disturbance appeared on the far edge of their sensors. It was small at first, almost like background noise, but Daniel knew the difference between noise and a real signature. He told Laura that they should run a deeper scan. She agreed and ordered him to enhance the readings. The ship responded with a soft hum as its sensor grid expanded to maximum range. A moment later, more signals appeared. They were faint and scattered, but they were too many to ignore. Something large was moving in the distance, moving in a way no natural object would. Laura asked Daniel if it was a fleet, and he said he did not know yet, but it was possible. The shape of the signals looked structured and artificial, and they were growing stronger. The horizon was flying into an area where no human vessel had ever gone before. That meant they could meet friendly explorers, or something worse. Carter, the tactical officer, walked onto the bridge just as Daniel began to isolate the signals. She had heard the alert in the hallway and came quickly, ready for anything. Was sharp, quiet, and always prepared. She asked what was happening, and Laura explained that they might not be alone. Moved straight to her station and prepared the defensive protocols, just in case. Daniel kept working until he finally caught a clear signature. He froze for a moment, then told the captain that the signals were definitely ships. Many ships, hundreds of them, and they were all moving in one direction, their direction. The room went very quiet. No one spoke as the information sank in. A single human vessel traveling on its own in deep space was not supposed to attract this kind of attention. Human explorers usually avoided direct contact with unknown large fleets, but here the horizon was, facing something huge and possibly dangerous. Daniel began counting the signatures, and the number shocked even him. The fleet was massive, much larger than any human force. The ships were arranged in a controlled formation. This was not a scouting party or a group of traders. This was a war fleet, a full armada. Asked if they were heading straight toward them, and Daniel said yes. The fleet's path lined up perfectly with the horizon. They were not drifting or patrolling. They were closing in. Laura felt the weight of the situation settle heavy on her chest. She asked if they could tell who the ships belonged to. Daniel said the signatures matched no known human ally. The shapes, the power levels, the formation style, everything pointed to one group, the Empire. Laura had heard the stories. Everyone had. They were an old empire that controlled large parts of the galaxy. They believed they were superior to most species, including humans. They had not bothered attacking Earth yet, but they had made it clear that humans were insignificant. To them, humans were a young race with weak fleets and basic weapons. If the Empire was sending its entire armada toward one human ship, it meant they were not here to talk. They were here to make a statement. Laura ordered Daniel to calculate how long they had before the fleet reached visual range. He said they had about 2 hours. 2 hours until they stood face to face with one of the strongest military powers in the galaxy. The crew worked quickly, prepared the weapon systems, though she knew they would not be enough against hundreds of enemy ships. The horizon was advanced for human standards, but it was still only one ship. Against a whole empire, it was almost nothing. But the horizon did have one advantage. It carried the new experimental defense grid, something only a handful of people in human space even knew existed. The shield was designed to absorb and redirect energy, using harmonic balance instead of brute force. It was risky, untested in real combat and highly unstable, but it was powerful, very powerful. Laura remembered the day she first heard about the grid. Engineers had whispered that it could change the future of human defense. It could turn weakness into strength. If it worked, Laura had agreed to test it because she believed in pushing progress. Now, out here, she wondered if that choice would save them or destroy them. Daniel calibrated the shield harmonics while prepared countermeasures. Every crew member moved quickly and quietly. No one panicked. They had trained for unknown threats. They had signed up knowing the risks, and they trusted one another. The signals grew stronger. The fleet was close enough now that it filled half the sensor screen. Hundreds of warships, each larger than the horizon. Formations lined up in long rows like waves ready to break on a small island. Laura asked Daniel if the fleet had sent any message. He checked and said no. There was nothing but silence. The Empire had not come to talk. They had come to crush a small human vessel and show the galaxy how weak humanity was. But the horizon did not turn back. It did not run. It held position, staying still in the empty space, waiting for the Empire to arrive. The ship looked calm from the outside, but inside the crew was working at full speed. Laura stood tall and focused, but she felt a storm inside her. She wondered if she should send a message to human space, warning them of what was coming. But if she did, they might detect it and react violently. For now, silence was safer. Daniel finished calibrating the shield and told Laura that the grid was ready. He warned that they should only activate it when necessary because the system used a huge amount of power. If they ran it too long, the ship might lose power completely. Confirmed that the weapons were armed. She reminded Laura that they could not win a fight, but they could defend themselves long enough to gather data. Information could save millions of lives later, even if the horizon did not survive. Laura listened to her crew and nodded. She told them they would not fire first. They would not give the Empire any reason to escalate the confrontation. They were here to explore, not to start a war. The fleet grew closer, their massive forms finally appearing on the outer cameras. Dark metal ships with sharp angles and glowing marks, moving like a giant silent storm. Dozens of heavy carriers, hundreds of attack ships, and command vessels the size of small cities. Daniel whispered that this was the largest formation he had ever seen recorded. It was more than a show of force. It was a message aimed at humanity. The bridge lights dimmed slightly as the ship adjusted to the incoming signals. Watched the tactical display, her eyes sharp. Daniel kept reading the sensor data, breathing slowly to stay calm. Laura held her hands behind her back and stood still. She felt both fear and determination. She knew that the horizon was the only human presence in this part of space. If they fell, no one would know what happened. But if they survived even a few minutes, they could bring back knowledge that might protect future human ships. The fleet spread out, surrounding the horizon from three sides. Their ships moved like pieces on a giant board, positioning themselves with perfect precision. It was clear they had practiced this many times. They were masters of intimidation. Then, without warning, a single command ship moved forward and stopped just outside weapon range. Its lights glowed like cold fire. The ship did not send a message. It simply waited. Laura knew what that meant. They wanted the horizon to make the first move. They wanted to show how fearless they were. But Laura had no intention of giving them what they wanted. She ordered the ship to hold its position. The horizon stayed still while the giant fleet surrounded it like a trap. The silence felt heavy, almost crushing. Then Daniel said something new appeared on the sensors, a sharp spike of energy. The fleet was charging their weapons. Laura took a slow breath and said two words that every crew member was waiting for. She told Daniel to activate the defense grid. The horizon hummed as the experimental shield came online. The air seemed to vibrate softly and the lights flickered. Daniel kept a close watch on the harmonics, gripped the edge of her console, ready for whatever happened next. The fleet fired. A bright wave of energy surged toward the horizon, lighting up the darkness of space. It was powerful enough to destroy a dozen ships. Laura watched silently as it approached. And then the wave hit the horizon. The shield flared in a burst of blue and silver light. The energy did not break through. Instead, it flowed across the shield like water hitting a solid rock. Then it bent, twisted, and shot back outward. The redirected energy wave hit the formation, striking their nearest ships with shocking force. 3 frigates collapsed inward, crushed by their own redirected power. Daniel stared in disbelief, whispered that the shield had just turned the attack back on them. Laura felt a mix of fear and awe. The grid worked. But now the Empire was angry. Their entire fleet began to move. And the horizon stood alone, bracing for what would come next. The horizon held its place in the middle of the vast dark space, floating like a small island surrounded by a rising storm. The fleet moved closer, ships lining up in sharp formations that reflected their strict military discipline. Captain Laura stood on the bridge, her eyes steady but her heart heavy. She knew the first attack had only been the beginning. The fleet would not stop until they crushed the human ship or understood why their first strike had failed. Daniel Price checked the shield harmonics again and again. He knew the grid was strong, but it was also unpredictable. The redirected energy had saved them once, but he had no idea how many times it could take that level of impact. Every wave of energy the Empire sent their way would push the system closer to its limit. Carter monitored the enemy weapons, her hands ready at the controls even though she knew their weapons could hardly match the Empire's firepower. She could feel the tension growing in the air, almost like the ship itself was holding its breath. The enemy ship spread out even more, creating a giant half-circle around the horizon. Dozens of glowing lines lit up along the sides of the hostile warships. Daniel took one look and announced that they were charging their main cannons. This would not be a test shot. This would be a full strike. Laura gave calm instructions despite the fear she felt rising inside her. She told Daniel to be ready to adjust the shield, and she ordered to hold fire unless she gave the word. They had to show control. They had to show they would not attack without a reason. The lights on the ships grew brighter, glowing like molten metal. Daniel counted the seconds. When the enemy cannons fired, the entire space lit up in a massive surge of energy. It was brighter and stronger than the first attack, a wave that could melt through most starships in one hit. The attack struck the horizon. The shield grid screamed under the pressure, vibrating so strongly that the lights on the bridge flickered. The energy bent across the shield like a storm hitting a thick wall. The system struggled, but it held. The wave twisted and shot outward again, bending like a river forced through a narrow valley. The redirected energy hit the ships once more. This time, the damage spread wider. Several cruisers spun out of control. A large carrier lost half its external plating, sending bright sparks floating into space. Daniel watched the readings and whispered that the shield had pushed itself close to the limit. One more attack that strong could break it. The crew listened with silent understanding. They had survived 2 attacks, but the Empire would not stop. The enemy fleet pulled back slightly, confused by the unexpected resistance. Laura watched the movement closely. She understood that they were not retreating, only reassessing. The Empire believed itself unbeatable. They would not accept that a human ship had turned their power against them. Asked if they should prepare for a counterattack, but Laura shook her head. They needed to save all the power they could. The shield system was their only real defense, and firing weapons now would only make the ship weaker. The fleet sent a communication signal at last. Daniel detected it, but the message was not meant for peaceful talk. It was a short burst of coded data. Decoded it quickly. It simply said that the Horizon should surrender. Laura stared at the message for a long moment. She knew they could not surrender. The Empire did not take prisoners. They took examples. The Horizon and its crew would be displayed as proof of what happened to those who stood alone. Laura responded with silence. The fleet began to move again. This time, smaller attack ships broke formation and flew forward at high speed. They approached like a swarm of metal insects, each one carrying enough firepower to destroy a human ship on its own. Daniel watched them closing in and warned that the shield could not take constant hits from so many directions. The system needed time to recharge between big energy impacts. The Horizon had none. The attack ships fired rapidly. Dozens of shots hit the Horizon from different angles. The shield grid struggled to redirect all of them. Some energy beams curved away harmlessly. Others bounced back toward the enemy ships, hitting them with scattered bursts of power. But not every attack could be turned aside. The ship shook violently. Alarms rang across the bridge. Grabbed her console as the ship trembled. Daniel called out that the grid was overloading. They needed to give it a moment to stabilize. Laura ordered the engines to fire and move the ship out of the center of the attack. The Horizon turned sharply, its engines flaring bright as it slipped through the tight formation. Several enemy ships blocked its path, but finally opened fire. The Horizon fired a series of precise shots aimed not at destroying but disabling. An attack ship lost its stabilizers and drifted sideways. Another lost its weapon systems. The Horizon slipped between them like a knife cutting through cloth. But the fleet was massive. For every ship they passed, 10 more closed in. The Horizon flew in a wide arc, trying to break free from the tight circle the fleet had formed around them. Laura knew they had to keep moving. If they stopped, the shield would fail. Daniel warned Laura that the shield needed a full reset soon. If they kept taking hits, the entire defense grid could collapse. Laura told him to do whatever he needed, even if it meant dropping the shield for a few seconds. Daniel hesitated. Dropping the shield could mean their destruction, but keeping it unstable was just as dangerous. The Horizon dodged another barrage. The ship shook again as a small hit slipped through, damaging part of the outer hull. Nothing critical yet, but it was getting worse. Daniel lowered the shield power briefly to correct its harmonic imbalance. The ship was exposed for a moment. During that second, a cruiser fired. The energy beam shot straight toward the Horizon. Gasped, but Daniel raised the shield just in time. The beam hit hard, the shield flared brightly, and the shockwave rattled the entire ship. Daniel steadied his breathing and continued adjusting the harmonics. Laura looked at the screen showing the enemy formation. They were trying new tactics. They learned quickly, and that was dangerous. They were now spreading their attacks to overload the shield in smaller bursts instead of one large strike. If they continued like this, the grid would eventually fail. Reported that several heavy carriers were moving forward. Their cannons began to glow with the telltale signs of an impending large-scale attack. Daniel checked the shield levels and shook his head. They could not survive a full volley from the heavy carriers. Laura made a decision. They would not wait to be hit. She ordered a sudden full-speed charge directly toward the nearest cluster of enemy cruisers. The crew stared in surprise but trusted her. The Horizon shot forward, engines burning bright. The cruisers did not expect a small human ship to rush into them. The sudden move threw their targeting systems off. Fired short bursts at key points. The shots hit engine ports and sensor arrays, disabling several cruisers without destroying them. The Horizon dove between them, avoiding the heavy carrier line. Daniel checked the shield again. It was still unstable but holding. The ship's sudden movement had bought them a few seconds. Laura used those seconds wisely. She ordered Daniel to scan the enemy formation and look for any weakness. Daniel worked quickly. He read power levels, movement patterns, communication bursts, and shield frequencies. The fleet was strong, but even strong forces had weak points. After a moment, Daniel noticed something. The ships were all linked to a central coordination network. The Empire controlled their fleets using a synchronized energy pattern that allowed them to move like a single giant organism. If they could disrupt that pattern, even briefly, the enemy formation would fall out of sync. Daniel explained the idea, understood immediately. If they hit the right place at the right moment, the entire fleet could lose its tight formation. Laura asked Daniel to find the exact point where the coordination network was strongest. Daniel worked fast, analyzing the energy pulses. He found it in the center of the fleet, where a large command ship pulsed with a unique signal. But reaching that ship would not be easy. It was deep inside the formation. Laura made her choice. They had to try. She ordered the Horizon to head straight toward the center of the fleet. The crew braced themselves as they moved deeper into the mass of warships. The enemy ships turned, fired, and chased them from all sides. Daniel adjusted the shield constantly, trying to stop it from failing, fired at anything that tried to block their path. The ship twisted through gaps barely wide enough to pass. The fleet realized what they were doing and tried to cut them off. Several attack wings closed in from ahead. Laura held her breath but kept going. The Horizon pushed harder. Close-range shots hit the shield, shaking the ship but not breaking it. Daniel shouted that they were close to the command ship. Prepare the targeting system. They only needed one good strike. The command ship grew larger on the screen. Its energy pulse was bright and steady. Daniel confirmed that it was the central point of the coordination network. Fired a concentrated shot at the exact point Daniel marked. The shot hit the command ship's energy relay. A burst of light exploded across the network. The entire formation flickered. Ships drifted out of sync. Their movements turned uneven. Their weapons misfired. The tight formation collapsed. Daniel stared at the readings with wide eyes. They had found the weakness. Laura took a deep breath. They had broken the perfect order of the massive fleet. But the battle was far from over. And the Empire was only getting angrier. The fleet was no longer moving like a single great machine. The perfect rhythm of their formation had broken apart after the Horizon struck their coordination point. Now the enemy ships drifted unevenly, their movements becoming rough and unsteady. Some cruisers turned in the wrong direction. Several attack ships lost communication signals and spun out of position. The once mighty armada looked confused, like a giant creature suddenly stunned. Captain Laura stood at the center of the bridge, watching the chaos on the screen. She knew this was not a victory. This was a small moment of breathing space, nothing more. The Empire was strong. They would recover soon, and when they did, they would come at the Horizon with full force. Daniel Price continued scanning the enemy ships. His face was focused, his eyes moving quickly between numbers. He said the disruption had reached most of the fleet, but it would not last long. They were already trying to restart their coordination network. He could see the energy lines slowly reconnecting. Carter checked the tactical map. She saw several wings of enemy ships pulling themselves back into order. She warned Laura that the Horizon needed to move before the fleet regained control. If they stayed in the center of the broken formation, they would be crushed once they regained their balance. Laura ordered the ship to increase speed. The Horizon shot forward, weaving between confused cruisers and drifting attack ships. The crew remained silent but alert, reacting to every shift in the ship's path. The engines hummed loudly as the small human vessel made its way toward open space. But the fleet was already recovering. A loud alarm rang across the bridge. Daniel shouted that a large portion of the enemy ships had reconnected to the command network. Several red lights appeared on the tactical map. The Empire was getting its order back. Saw the first organized group of enemy ships moving toward them. It was a formation of fast interceptors. They were quick and lightly armored, designed to chase down smaller targets. She told Laura that the interceptors were coming at full speed. Laura did not hesitate. She told to prepare evasive moves. The horizon shifted sharply to the left, just in time to avoid a volley of glowing bolts from the interceptors. The shots flew past the ship and exploded in bright flashes behind them. Daniel adjusted the shield harmonics again. The grid was still unstable after the earlier attacks. He watched the readings carefully, hoping it could handle the sudden spikes of energy from the incoming hits. The interceptors circled the horizon, firing rapid bursts. Each burst made the ship shudder. Laura ordered sharp turns, dips, and sudden climbs. The horizon danced between the attacks, avoiding most of the hits but not all. A few shots struck the shield, causing bright sparks to ripple across its surface. Daniel said the shield could take a few more hits but not many, suggested firing back at the interceptors. Laura thought about it for a moment. They needed space. They needed distance between them and the recovering fleet. She gave the order to fire. The horizon released a burst of precise shots, aimed carefully, hitting the interceptors not to destroy but to disable. Two of them spun out of control. One lost its engines and drifted away. The remaining interceptors regrouped and fired again, angrier than before. Laura ordered a sudden dive. The horizon dropped downward quickly, causing the enemy shots to pass far above. The interceptors tried to follow, but their formation was broken by their own speed. Daniel watched the long-range sensors. He saw something worse approaching. The heavy carriers at the back of the fleet were powering up. Their cannons shone like burning stars. They were preparing a massive, coordinated strike. Stared at the readings and said quietly that the horizon could never survive a full hit from those cannons, even with the new shield grid. Daniel agreed. The energy level was too high. The defensive system would overload instantly. Laura looked at the tactical display. They had to get out of the carrier line of fire. They needed to move further toward the broken part of the fleet before the heavy cannons finished charging. She ordered the engines to full speed. The horizon rushed forward, cutting through the disordered ships. The fleet was still struggling to reform, but the heavy carriers were stable enough to fire soon. The seconds passed quickly. Daniel monitored the buildup of energy from the carriers. He said they had less than 1 minute before the cannons fired, kept directing the ship's path, pointing out the safest gaps they could slip through. But they were recovering faster than expected. A group of cruisers moved into their path, blocking their escape route. Their weapons glowed, ready to fire. Fired a quick shot that damaged one cruiser's sensors, but the others held their positions. Laura made a bold decision. She ordered the horizon to move straight toward the gap between the cruisers, a space so narrow it seemed impossible to pass without being hit. Protested that it was too risky. Daniel warned the shield might fail in such close-range fire. But Laura stayed firm. She believed they could make it. The horizon shot toward the narrow gap. The cruisers fired at the same time. The shots hit the shield at close range, shaking the entire ship violently. Daniel held onto his console, gritted her teeth. The lights flickered wildly. The horizon slipped through the gap with only meters to spare. The ship was bruised, the hull scraped, but it survived. Behind them, the cruisers struggled to turn and follow. But the heavy carriers had finished charging. Daniel shouted that the cannons were about to fire. Laura knew they only had a second to act. She ordered a sudden hard turn downward, almost a drop. The horizon plunged sharply. A bright wall of energy shot overhead, missing them by a very small distance. The massive blast tore through several of the own ships that were still out of formation. The explosion lit up the entire region of space like a burning sunrise. Stared at the aftermath in shock. Daniel whispered that if they had stayed in their earlier path for even 2 seconds longer, they would have been destroyed. The horizon steadied itself after the sudden dive. but they were still trapped inside the fleet. Enemy ships surrounded them in every direction. Even if the coordination network was not fully restored, the Empire still had overwhelming firepower. They had more ships, more weapons, and more experience. Laura knew they could not simply escape. The fleet was too large. They needed a new plan. Daniel tried to track the connection signals between the ships again. He saw that the coordination network was damaged but slowly stabilizing. The command ship they hit earlier was trying to rebuild the energy link. If it succeeded, the entire fleet would return to perfect order. Noticed that some ships were moving toward the horizon's path, trying to trap them again. Time was running out. Daniel found something new in the readings. The ships depended heavily on their coordination network not just for movement but for focusing their shield fields. Without the network, their shields were less stable. Their defenses dropped in strength. That gave Laura an idea. She told Daniel to locate the weakest point in the partially rebuilt network. Daniel scanned the data quickly. He found that a secondary relay ship, a smaller vessel behind the main formation, was acting as a temporary connection point. If they hit that ship, they could disrupt the network again. But reaching it meant flying straight into a cluster of enemy ships. Frowned, she said it was dangerous. Daniel warned that one mistake would put them in direct line of fire from multiple warships. Laura listened to them but made her decision. They had no choice. If they did nothing, the fleet would reform and they would die. If they acted, they might break the fleet's control again and create another chance to escape. She told them to prepare. The horizon turned sharply toward the relay ship. The enemy ships reacted instantly. They fired from all sides. The horizon swerved, dodging as many shots as it could. Daniel kept the shield harmonics balanced, his hands moving quickly across the controls, fired at several enemy ships to create small openings. The horizon sped through the chaos. The relay ship came into view. Its energy pulse was weak but steady. Daniel confirmed it was the right target. Aimed carefully, she waited for the right moment. The ship shook as several shots struck the shield. Daniel warned they were close to overload, but would not miss. She fired. The shot hit the relay ship directly in the center. It exploded in a burst of bright light. Daniel watched the network readings collapse again. The lines disconnected. The fleet fell into disorder for the second time. Laura breathed out slowly, but she did not smile. This was still only a temporary victory. They were still alone in the middle of a hostile fleet. Asked what they should do now. Laura looked at the map. There was a path through the drifting ships, a narrow way out of the densest part of the fleet. She ordered the horizon to follow that route. The human ship moved forward, slipping past confused enemy vessels. More ships fired at them, but the shots were scattered and uncoordinated. Daniel warned that the shield grid needed a recharge soon. Watched the growing clusters of ships ahead. The path was tight, but it was their best chance. The horizon flew forward, determined and desperate. The Empire had been shaken. But the battle was still far from finished. And somewhere deep in the fleet, a new threat was preparing to rise. The horizon moved through the drifting remains of the broken formation, carrying the weight of every moment that had come before. The engines glowed softly, pushing the ship forward with controlled speed. Even with the chaos around them, the horizon felt steady, like a single calm point inside a violent storm. But the crew knew the danger was far from over. The Empire was not defeated. Not yet. Captain Laura stood on the bridge, keeping her focus sharp. Her crew depended on her strength. Her ship depended on her decisions. She felt tired, but she did not allow herself to slow down. They still had to escape the heart of the fleet. Daniel Price checked the shield grid one more time. He could see the stress running through the system. The harmonics were unbalanced. The shield was at its limit. If the system took another full hit from a heavy weapon, it might collapse completely. Even a few smaller hits could burn out the remaining power. Carter monitored the sensor screen. Enemy ships were slowly recovering from the second disruption. Several cruisers began to turn, forming messy but dangerous groups. More attack ships moved in from the outer line, closing the distance between themselves and the horizon. Laura knew they could not outfight the entire fleet. They had to outthink them. Daniel told her that the coordination network had been damaged again, but small parts of it were starting to reconnect. The Empire's ships were trying to regain control. The enemy fleet was like a wounded beast, angry and struggling to stand back up. Saw a large ship moving toward them. It was not like the others. It was bigger, darker, and its hull glowed with a deep red color. She checked the readings and realized it was a high command vessel. It belonged to someone important. Laura understood. The Empire had sent one of their highest-ranking leaders into the battle. The ship broadcast a signal. Daniel received it instantly and played the translated message. A deep voice filled the bridge. It was the voice of High Marshal. Spoke with cold confidence. He said the horizon had proven itself strong for a human vessel, but it would not escape. He told them the Empire admired courage but did not tolerate defiance. He demanded they surrender and accept their fate. Laura did not respond. She stood silently, her eyes fixed on the screen. Continued speaking. He said that resistance would only make the end worse. He said the galaxy needed to see what happened to those who stood against the Empire. He told them that the horizon would not break the future of the Empire. Laura turned off the transmission. Looked at her, waiting for a command. Daniel held his breath. Laura simply said that they would keep moving. The high command ship moved closer. Its weapons glowed with heavy energy. It was preparing to fire. Daniel warned that the shield could not take a direct hit from such a powerful weapon. Laura studied the ship. She noticed something strange. The high command vessel emitted steady waves of energy. It was not random. It was part of the coordination network. It was acting as a new anchor point for the entire fleet. Daniel noticed it too. If they disrupted ship, the fleet's coordination would collapse again, this time completely. If the anchor point fell, the network could not be rebuilt quickly. Laura understood this was their last chance. She told Daniel to find the exact point on the command ship where the coordination energy was gathering. Daniel worked quickly. His fingers moved fast across the controls, prepared the targeting system, but was not passive. The high command ship fired. A wide beam of red energy sliced through space toward the horizon. Laura ordered a sharp turn. The ship tilted to the side, engines flaring. The beam passed close enough to shake the entire hull. Daniel said the next shot would be even stronger. Fired a precise burst at one of the smaller enemy ships to clear a path. The horizon surged forward, aiming straight at ship. The rest of the fleet struggled to adjust. They were out of sync again, scattered and confused. Some ships drifted, others fired wildly. Laura kept her eyes on the high command vessel. Daniel found the coordination point. It was located near the front of the ship, where several energy lines met. Aimed carefully, she waited for the right moment. The ship trembled as smaller hits struck the shield. Daniel shouted that they were close to overload. Charged another weapon blast. Laura told to fire. Fired a long, focused shot that hit the front of the command ship. The entire vessel glowed with sudden light. A wave of energy pulsed out like a shockwave. The coordination network snapped apart. Daniel watched the readings collapse entirely. The fleet's control system broke in half. Ships across the area drifted uncontrollably. Their shields flickered. Their weapons lost targeting alignment. The fleet fell into complete confusion, but was not finished. His ship fired another shot, even though the coordination point was damaged. The beam shook the horizon violently. The shield grid burned bright blue and nearly shattered. Daniel shouted that the shield could not take another hit. tried to target the command ship again, but the horizon was shaking too much. The ship drifted sideways, pushed by the shockwave of the blast. Laura gripped her chair to stay steady. She ordered the engines to maximum power. The horizon shot away from the command ship, heading toward the broken gaps in the fleet. Enemy ships tried to reorganize, but without the network, they were too slow. Several fighters chased the horizon, firing small, rapid shots, disabled 2 of them. Daniel adjusted the shield's last bits of energy. The ship moved with tight turns, dodging incoming fire. The horizon pushed through the drifting enemy lines. The stars ahead looked clear. They were close to open space, but was still behind them. Daniel sensed a massive energy spike. The high command ship was preparing a final destructive shot. It was stronger than anything they had seen so far. It could wipe out the horizon instantly. Laura looked at her crew. She knew they had no shield left to survive it. They had no weapon strong enough to stop it. But they did have something else. The redirected shield energy. Daniel realized what she was thinking. If they angled the shield grid just right, even in its weakened state, it could reflect part of the incoming energy back toward the command ship. The grid would break afterward, but it might buy them a chance. Hesitated. The grid was almost dead. Using it again might destroy the horizon. Laura made her choice. She said they would try. Daniel worked fast to adjust the remaining harmonics, prepared the ship's position. The horizon slowed for a brief moment, pointing its nose back toward the incoming threat. Fired. A huge beam of burning red energy blasted toward the horizon. The crew held their breath. Daniel activated the shield grid. The shield flared weakly, but it formed a thin, reflective layer. The energy hit the grid. The ship shook so hard the lights exploded in sparks. The shield bent under the weight. It cracked. But before it collapsed, it reflected part of the energy back. The redirected beam hit ship in a blazing strike. The front of the command vessel exploded in a massive burst of fire. The shockwave tore through the ship's core. The high command vessel fell apart. Silence filled the bridge. Daniel checked the sensors. The coordination network was completely gone. The remaining fleet ships drifted without order. Many had shut down their weapons. Others had lost power. The Empire had lost its command. Whispered that they could finally escape. Laura gave the order. The horizon turned away from the ruined fleet, its engines burning bright. The human ship moved into open space, slipping past the last scattered enemy ships. For the first time since the battle began, the stars ahead were clear. Daniel slumped back in his chair, breathed out slowly. Laura felt her shoulders relax just slightly. They had survived. As the horizon moved far away from the battlefield, Daniel sent a message back toward human space. It carried data from the entire battle, the shield readings, enemy formation patterns, weaknesses in the coordination network. This information would change everything. Watched the fading glow of the destroyed command ship behind them. She knew the galaxy would talk about this for years. A single human ship had fought an entire fleet. And the fleet had lost. Laura looked at her crew and said softly that humanity would no longer be ignored. The horizon moved on, carrying the story of what happened into the future. And the galaxy would never forget it.